And Antony is a marine archaeologist by background. He specialises in strategic and policy. He has a long-standing history in the archaeology of freshwater environments. He first became involved in archaeology as a volunteer diver when he was a student, and did a master's in management and a PhD jointly in law and archaeology, before carrying out a wide range of projects on both land and sea. He set up Fjordr in 2012 to focus on innovative research projects closely related to questions of policy and practice, and he's still an active diver, and that includes diving in rivers. So anyone that's just joined us, we are going to be recording tonight's event. So if you don't want to be recorded, please do turn off your camera, and we ask that you keep your mics muted throughout Antony's talk. So I would like to hand over to Antony, and welcome Antony, and thank you, Antony.
Okay, so thanks very much
to deliver tonight's talk.
Okay, I'll just share screen, start the screen. So hopefully you can see that. I'm just moving things around. So can you see my screen?
Yeah, we've got that.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, good stuff. Okay, so good evening. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to have a chat to you this evening. Thanks to everyone at Connecting the Culm for arranging this, and for being our hosts this evening. As Sarah said, I'm Antony Firth. I'm from a small company called Fjordr Limited, and I'm presenting on behalf of myself and Emma Firth, who's also from Fjordr, and we're archaeologists specialising in marine, coastal and inland waters. We're looking at the history of the River Culm, the way people have used the river, and how they've changed the watercourse over the centuries. Again, this presentation is based on a project called Historic Watercourses River Culm, and that's funded and supported by Historic England. The project started in September 2019, and sorry, just bear with me. Yeah, started in September 2019, and we completed much of the mapping work in April 2020. And the work's been extended in the light of disruption from COVID, and it's also to enable us to keep working closely with the Connecting the Culm team. We're grateful also for the support we've had from Blackdown Hills, AOMB, Devon County Council, and other organisations represented on our project steering group, including the Environment Agency, National Trust, Mid-Devon District Council and South West Heritage Trust. I'm going to split the presentation into 4 sections to look at the background and scope of our work on the Culm, to outline the sources and methods we've been using, to set out some of our results and their potential implications for the river's future, and to discuss the next steps. Now, our geographical scope on this project is the whole of the Culm catchment, including its tributaries. And this marks a change from an earlier project that we did on the Dorset Stour, where we first developed and piloted this approach, the historic watercourses approach. On the Dorset Stour, we focused on the main channel alone, not least because the Stour catchment is really extensive, so extensive. So here we are, we're on the Culm. Oops, my pointer points in 2 places at once. Okay, here's the Culm, and here's the Stour here, and you see the Stour's rather longer, and so we concentrated just on the main channel. The Culm is our second pilot, and it's allowed us to refine and streamline our methods. And our work on the Culm came about through discussion with Blackdown Hills AOMB and Devon County Council when Connecting the Culm was being prepared. So we've been able to work pretty much in tandem from the start. So what are we interested in? We're looking at the watercourse context of known assets. So using if you like, a watery lens to better understand sites that are already known. We're looking at blank areas, looking for the physical remains that have not been recognised previously or recorded previously on watercourses. Looking for evidence of activities that might leave to do with the river that might leave a trace in the physically, and which might imply the presence of archaeological material in the watercourse. We're also looking at watercourses as artifacts, recognizing that there are places where the form of the watercourse itself is not natural because of human interventions in the past. And we're looking at changing relationships, what the history and archaeology of the river indicate about how people's relationship with the watercourse has changed through time. Sorry, just playing around with my mouse, getting it back onto the right screen. Now, the aim of the project on the Culm is to bring together evidence about the history of the river with the intention of improving its management and sharing the river's history with the public. The objectives cover really three strands: the mapping and evidence side of things, making sure our approach is useful and applicable in other catchments, and then helping people to get involved in finding out about the history of the river and its implications. So these are set down here, but as I say, it's about evidence, about the methodology, the new methodology, and public engagement. And we boiled this down in the COVID extension work to co-creation, trying to feed into the processes that Connecting the Culm is involved in developing and adopting best practice so that what we do here can be used in other places, and also the focus on citizen science, so ways in which people can engage proactively with the history of the river. Right, I've just, this is a little break slide. So what I've found is that if I chat on for half an hour all in one block, it gets very dull and seems not very interesting for people. So I thought I'd put a little break slide in, and it also gives me a chance to find out where the chat room has gone. So what I would say is if people have things that they want to raise, even from the off, if you put them in the chat, then I can pick them up as we go. Or at least I can in principle, except I can't see the chat on Zoom. So just...
I think, Anthony, when you're showing the screen, it's quite hard to see the chat. So what we'll do is we'll keep an eye on the chat, and we'll share any comments as they come through.
That's great. So if there are things that people don't know, just put them in the chat, and if this Connecting the Culm team can pass them on, I'll be happy to answer them as we go. Yeah, you're quite right. I can't find the chat at all. I was hoping to keep an eye on it in case people wanted to say that I don't get what you're saying there. Right. Okay, but we'll move on. So this is essentially a desk-based project. There's been no field work other than a few site visits, and even these have been curtailed by COVID. And one of the consequences is that I've got to apologise for the lack of photographs. We've got very few photographs of the Culm, unfortunately. Our main tool is GIS, which is a geographical information system. And we've been using a program called QGIS, which is a publicly available free-to-use system. And in brief, GIS software allows you to bring together information that can be mapped, to combine and compare it, and then to make new information. So in effect, we use several different layers to make a new layer, basically, of a map. And aside from the background layers showing the river and the extent of the floodplain, we have 5 main sources. I'm going to go through these in a little bit of detail to give you a sense of what we've been doing. But they're, in essence, it's the existing archaeological and heritage records, historic maps, LiDAR data, vertical photography, and non-mapped sources. So although we're using an approach which is very much based around maps, we use sources such as documentary sources, published and pictorial sources, which are just not available as a map, but they're useful when we're doing our interpretations. So for existing archaeological and heritage records, we draw on the historic environment record maintained by Devon County Council, and we cross-check that with details of statutory designations such as scheduled monuments and listed buildings, with some data that comes from Historic England. Now, Devon has a very comprehensive HER, But in general terms, watercourses in England have not been the focus previously of systematic archaeological survey. So in consequence, historic features associated with watercourses tend to be underrepresented. And that's one of the main reasons for carrying out this work. There's an exception when more obvious things, particularly in and around towns where you've got built heritage, like bridges tend to be represented, canals and so on, that kind of thing. But away from that kind of built environment, rivers tend not to be well represented in existing archaeological records. For historic maps, we've generally used two sets of sources. Precise and accurate Ordnance Survey maps, which I'll come on to in a moment, but also non-Ordnance Survey maps, which might be less precise geographically, but they often take us back to earlier periods. And of the non-OS sources, tide maps, like the example shown here, is especially valuable. Now, they have the advantage of giving us a fairly detailed picture of the landscape from around about 1840, as the general period when tide maps are available from. Their other big advantage of tide maps is that they usually come with apportionments, which are lists of each of the plots shown on the map. And the apportionment indicate who owned the plot, who occupied the land at that time, and what they used it for. And the apportionments often include field names as well. And the field names are particularly useful because they can indicate the history of the land from an even earlier period. So we find references to things like mills are referred to it in field names, or things like tenter grounds, which are places where cloth that had been processed in a mill was hung up to dry, and all sorts of different like mead names, which indicate the former presence of meadows and that kind of thing. So the apportionment that goes with the map is especially useful. Now, all the tide maps and apportionments are available digitally online from Devon County Council, and that's been a great help to this project. So you can go and have a look at them yourselves. Another important non-OS map source is estate maps. Now, and they tend to take us a little bit earlier into the 18th and sometimes into the 17th century. Now, unfortunately, we haven't been able to make as much use of these as we would like because they have to be looked at in person at record offices, which has been problematic this year, but we still hope to be able to include some of these in due course. Of the Ordnance Survey maps, we probably make greatest use of the 25-inch to the mile county series, which come from the closing decades of the 19th century. So 1880, from them. These are very detailed and precise in terms of their surveying and georeferencing, so they're a really very good source. They give us a view of the landscape before the major changes of the 20th century, but even here in this one, you can see how the railway, which was built in the 1840s, has cut through the floodplain and required changes to the watercourse. So around here, there's the river's been diverted from an earlier course, and also here. And also it's prompting issues with drainage. You'll see this swampy area backing up against the embankment of the railway. So that it shows those kinds of things. And although these Ordnance Survey maps show the landscape in a period that is, in archaeological terms, quite recent, the details that they show point back to much earlier periods. So we can see things from the pattern of the landscape, the patterns of the boundaries, the field boundaries, of lanes and tracks and that kind of thing. That, although this is being mapped in the 19th century, it's giving us a view much earlier, in several hundred years at least, and sometimes more. Now, this is an example of vertical photography. It's an aerial photograph taken shortly after World War II, and it shows some interesting details also. Now, we haven't, as part of this project, carried out a comprehensive examination of our photographs because that kind of project has been done quite recently for the area of the River Culm, and the results have been made available to us through the Historic Environment Record. So there was no need for us to revisit this. So it's more the case that if we have these images available, and that would include this set, which is available through the from Devon County Council, but also Google Maps, Google Earth, and the historic function on that is really useful. So we use those vertical photographs to help in that interpretive process, and in one of the most useful things in that is to be able to check what we're seeing is actually a result of fairly recent processes, modern activity. So those are useful also. Now this is some LiDAR data. It's all from the same block. Now LiDAR data is in effect a laser scan taken of the ground from an aircraft. It consists of many millions of digital points in three-dimensional space, and those can be processed in various ways to make fine details stand out. And as you can see, it shows big features like the so there's the railway on its embankment again, but also the motorway looking alongside it, and you can see the disturbance to the ground associated with the motorway too. So it shows up those big features, but it also allows us to see much finer features such as former channels, field boundaries, drainage patterns, and so on. And you can see lots of different things going on in the LiDAR here. A lot of drainage, former channels, and so on. In short, it shows the cumulative effect of natural and human impacts on the surface of the ground. And some of these are recent, but in places we can see back, well, probably 1,000 years and more. So we combine these diverse sources using the GIS and look at them together in various combinations. I should stress that this is an exercise in interpretation. There are all sorts of factors to take into account with each of these sources, and no single silver bullet really in terms of methods. Now, our aim is to make this evidence available to catchment managers, to take it all from all these different sources. So the emphasis is to bring them all together to make a simple single layer of historic watercourse evidence. So this gives you an idea. So we've got some of the LiDAR on as a backdrop here, but otherwise this shows the results of our mapping. So the places we want to flag are mapped as two-dimensional shapes. That so here's one here outlined in red, and in GIS they're referred to as polygons. So we call the things we map historic watercourse polygons, or HWPs. So if you catch me referring to HWPs or see them on the slides, that's what they are. It's a historic watercourse polygon. And as well as the shape, we record some basic information about what we can see, its possible age, the evidence we have used, and a note of any of the heritage assets that might be associated with it. So if you like, with this shape highlighted in red, there's a little database table in effect. And in this one, it might be a bit small for you to read, but it gives it its identification number, it says what it is, its period, a brief description of it, and the evidence that we've used, the source of evidence we've used to flag it.
Anthony, just had a question from the chat. Steve Fletcher says, is there any intention to follow up with field work?
Yeah, I'll come on to that. If
okay.
I can, that's that would be in the next steps.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Sorry, I've as you can tell, my red button squiggling around. It won't let me get it back to the screen. Just bear with me. Right, okay, I think that's all right. Yep. So I'd like to emphasize that this has been quite a rapid exercise. The focus has been on flagging places where we think there's something noteworthy and linking it back to the evidence we've used. It's not been our intention to go into detail about the history of each of the places we've flagged. They often have a long and complex story that would require much closer examination, and just to pick up on that point, even field work to fully understand them. So there's some, image here is showing the same slot with a whole series of polygons on there with Tithe, the Ordnance Survey, and a LiDAR. And we've flagged some pretty big areas in here. If we were to go down to another level of detail to try and unpick each of those areas, it would take a phenomenal amount of time and might not even be resolvable from the desk-based sources we've been using. So we're flagging, in some cases, quite big features and completely understand that we're not picking up every detail of them or the whole complex history. In a lot of these cases, these are places which have had phases and phases and phases of activity over certainly decades, probably centuries, and unpicking that is quite hard, would be quite hard work. So yeah, there's another break. So if anyone, again, use the chat, the points that you want to make, I'll pause briefly while you quickly type in there, and then we can pick up those questions either as we go or at the end.
So we have one from Tim Youngs, Anthony. We have the question, how have Historic England influenced catchment management bodies such as the Environment Agency using the outputs from your 2 pilots, and what more could we do locally to influence?
Right, okay, so that's quite a big question. So obviously I can't actually speak for Historic England, so that's, we're doing, if you like, the technical side. We provide the data and then they can take it on. So what we've done with the Stour is pass that on to the catchment partnership on the Stour Catchment Initiative for them to be able to use, and hopefully they are using it. And then Historic England has some pretty extensive discussions ongoing with Environment Agency staff about how to use this kind of data and how to increase the awareness of the historic character of watercourses and to actually build that into proposals and projects. And that's kind of an ongoing discussion particularly through the NEAS part of the Environment Agency and their archaeologists. And I can't remember what NEAS stands for just at this moment, but that's who they speak to. At a local level, obviously we're making this available through Connecting the Culm, and so if there's really any way that we can draw this into planning for catchment management is a good thing. And again, I'll touch a little bit on that towards the end. So I hope that's all right. Okay.
Thanks, Anthony. One more.
Yep.
We have a wood from Adam. We have would this mapping tie into natural flood management mapping tools as well to highlight areas that may have been used historically for flood prevention?
Yes, and yeah, I will touch on that a little bit. So that's very much the hope with carrying out this work alongside the Connecting the Culm project, is that these results can feed directly into identifying or informing at least proposals for natural flood management. But I'll certainly come on to that a little bit later as well.
One final one, because it may be something again that you cover, from Richard. Is this mostly the lower Culm, or does it also include upper reaches such as tributaries?
The
Hemyock?
Okay, yeah, the whole of the Culm, going up some pretty small tributaries actually. So some of them you could probably step across. I mean, it's a question of it was one of the questions that's run through the project, is quite how far up the tributaries we extend, because some of them are really small and we would end up just mapping the whole of the Black Downs if we're not careful. So we drew a limit around one of the Ordnance Survey layers, which is have a layer called Watercourse Link, and we use that as our kind of our study area. But we do cover the whole of the catchment. It's not just the main channel.
Brilliant, thanks, Anthony.
Yeah. Grand, there we go. Actually, that shows the map. So this is our single layer of the Culm. Includes 1,223 polygons. I would say straight away that we probably haven't captured everything. Each time we go back to this data, we see something more and have further questions, but it should be enough to flag the presence of historic features and of the overall human character of the catchment to users of this data set. As a breakdown by theme on the right, as you can see, the crossing points, agriculture and river management predominate in terms of what we've seen of the river through the past. And just to explain, there's a category there for non-themed HWPs, and they're places that don't fit easily into these other categories. And it's often because we can see something in the data, there's clearly something going on, but there's not sufficient information for us to be able to interpret it. So we've got quite a lot of what we call non-themed HWPs also. Yeah, so I'm still struggling to find my mouse, which is really awkward. So from these raw numbers and the extent of HWPs on the map, I hope you can see just how much of the Culm has been affected by human activity over the centuries. So like most rivers in England and in many places around the world, the River Culm is not a wholly natural system. And whilst it makes sense to look for nature-based solutions and to work with natural processes to address problems in the catchment, we have to do this within a system that we recognise as a hybrid of natural and human factors. So, oh, sorry, I'm just going to go back one. Throughout the catchment, we can point to ways in which people have used the river over many centuries, and that provides the basis for thinking about how we could take it forward in the future. Sorry, just bear with me. So some of the changes that people have made to the catchment occurred a very long time ago. These changes were big processes that don't lend themselves to being mapped in the way we've been doing, and that's partly because it requires detailed investigation that's often limited to only small areas. But briefly, the whole of the catchment, the whole of the floodplain reflects flows of sediment that occurred several thousand years ago. And these are probably associated with changing land use even in prehistory, including the intensification of arable farming as far back as the Bronze Age, causing the floodplain to be blanketed by thick deposits of alluvium. And people also changed the vegetation of the catchment, in particular changing the amount of tree cover. And the floodplain is likely to have comprised pasture and grazing rather than woodland for much of the last 1,000 years, and probably for several millennia preceding that also. The upshot of these major changes in the basic character of the catchment many thousands of years ago makes some notions like river restoration rather problematic. In a sense, there is no going back, but understanding how people have lived with the river, excuse me, how people have lived with the river for these great stretches of time gives us a good basis for going forward. Now, for very long periods, people have lived in the Culm catchment in a sustainable way in partnership with the river. Across the centuries and millennia, there have been all sorts of environmental and economic challenges, and people have had to adapt and to be resilient. I don't want to underplay the very major changes we're facing now in terms of the climate emergency and biodiversity crisis, but the Culm and its landscape is a thick book of stories about how people have lived here and coped with changing times. I also don't want to imply any rosy nostalgia about the past. There's no going back culturally either, but the past might help us choose how we want to keep going forwards. I'm just going to go through a few of the types of site that we've been looking at to give a bit of a flavour for it. Obviously, I can't go through 1,200 different features, but we'll cover some of the types. So some of the biggest changes are to the Culm due to mills. And we tend to think of these as 18th and 19th century buildings, but really we need to see them as complex water management systems dating back 700 or 800 years, probably more, of which the machinery in a building is just a small component. Illustrating that here with the I'm trying to illustrate this. Yeah, with the Colin John Mill. So you see here, so there's a mill that's disappeared, but there it is down in the bottom corner. And the whole of this is the water management system up to this weir here with various offshoots and so on that enables that mill to work. Now, for centuries, agricultural and industrial processes in the catchment were powered in effect by renewable energy. And there were very many more mills in earlier times than the 19th and early 20th century sites that we might be more familiar with. Column John here dates back to Doomsday and was supplied by this major artificial channel or leat. And the leat is at least artificial up to about this point, whereas here it looks like they've used a part of the natural channel of the river. So the mill and the leat have disappeared from modern maps. You see that it's not marked, nor is the leat. It's completely gone as far as the modern mapping is concerned. But the water management structures and a good part of the leat still actually survive in the landscape once you take a look. At Kensham Mill, which is shown here, Martin Watts has flagged the excavation of a 1.3 kilometre leat in the 1290s. So that's 1.3 kilometres. Pretty much corresponds to the very substantial leat. So here we go, leaving the river up here at a weir, running down to the mill, and then out back to the river. So that's about 1.3 kilometres too. So that substantial leat that's there in the towards the end of the 19th century is probably at least partly the one that was constructed about 600 years earlier. I just want to emphasize the point that people are capable of making very major interventions in the watercourse back into the medieval period. And perhaps more of the leats that we associate with mills in later centuries might be similarly aged. Some of these systems have potential for being reactivated to provide connectivity between the river and the floodplain, and access to temporary storage in times of flood also. So these older features do, I think, have potential in terms of future flood management too. Water meadows, they're another form of human intervention. And by water meadow here, I mean the constructed forms of bedworks within floodplains and catchworks on hillsides. They date typically to the 17th and 18th century, and they involved a high level of capital investment and maintenance, and generally went out of use in the late 19th century. We've got this is a water meadow near Clay Hyden. You can just see this, that there is, if you look very carefully, there's a channel in there and then a little access bridge over it. And this is near France Farm. This is a catchworks, and hopefully you can see here there's these ridges following the contours and going down the hillside, which would help spill the water in a controlled way down the hillside. And in some places there remains still very obvious topographic features, and elsewhere they've been levelled or ploughed out, but they're still visible in the LiDAR. And the thing that I want to, sorry, I'm having such problems with my mouse not allowing me to move down my page. I just want to emphasize here is just how extensive these systems are. So much of the water, the sediment and nutrients in the catchment, at the time that these meadows were active, a very high proportion of the catchment flows would have been subject to fairly kind of cumulatively a lot of control through a lot of minor actions over these very wide areas. So they would have had a huge impact on quite how the catchment performed as a whole in the 18th and 19th centuries particularly. Now the constructed water meadows, they became common, as I say, in the last 200 or 300 years, but people were plainly using flooding and perhaps augmenting it for hay and for grazing from much earlier times. On the Culm, we're confident that we have surviving physical evidence of floodplain meadows that date back to the medieval period and perhaps earlier. And we see their distinct funnel-shaped forms, you see them here, linked to a droveway. So there's a droveway funneling out into a floodplain meadow along the side of the river, and this one's right alongside another one, again with its droveway funneling out, and you can see here that it's actually subdivided into smaller plots, used for grazing, but especially for growing hay. and that's their real key role, is to grow hay, and probably in common, and then divided up between the people who had rights to use that common. So we can see them in the 1840s, but they probably go back much earlier, almost certainly go back much earlier. Where their early flora survives, floodplain meadows have a very high nature conservation value. They're an important carbon sink, and they actually depend for their character on temporarily storing water. Now, across Europe, 97% of these habitats, these floodplain meadow habitats, were lost between 1930 and 1990 due to the intensification of agricultural processes. But the relics of them, their shape is still often visible, even in the landscape today. And I think the thing I'd like to outline here is, to underline here rather, is that people were using and actually dependent on flooding for their livelihoods to create. Hay is absolutely vital to agricultural communities. They're dependent on flooding for perhaps 1,000 years, and that's why these distinct forms carried on and stayed in use. Right, the last one that I just want to touch on is woodlands. We have lots of instances of woodland being cultivated in proximity to water. We've got over 50 osier and alder beds marked either on the Ordnance Survey or on tide maps. Now, osiers, they're willow trees cropped for withies, which are thin, pliable sticks that had a wide range of uses. And alder is resistant to decay in water, which makes it useful for various purposes. And its flowers can be used to make a bright green dye, and that might have been important for the cloth industry locally. So we see lots of these either marked up as you can see here, willow bed. There's the watercourse going through the middle of it there, or the Ordnance Survey has a distinct way of marking up osiers, which is these little lines with these little trees sticking out of. And so this is not natural woodland, it's maintained and cultivated woodland. It may have even been planted expressly for cultivation, and quite often associated with little networks of channels and so on to keep it irrigated. So another quick pause. Again, feel free to make use of the chat and raise any questions. If not, I've only got, getting on, so I've only got another couple of slides to go, and then we can have a longer chat. All okay? Silence. Must be good. Okay, we'll keep going.
So we've not really had any direct questions, but we've had a lot of interest from people about the data and talking about lots of different things, but not any questions as such. So
okay. Right, well, we can come, hopefully when I finish, I can then look at the chat and then see what people have been saying and then hopefully address that also.
Great.
So yeah, next steps. So we have this layer of over 1,200 features in the catchment of the Culm. We're already feeding this information to the Connecting the Culm team to help inform their overall approach, the blueprint for the Culm, and also to feed into their plans for demonstration projects for working with natural processes. As I mentioned earlier, understanding how people have already influenced the river, often long ago, we hope can help in planning new interventions to address flooding, drought, habitats, and so on. I think there's particular potential to consider how earlier forms of land management can present us with some triple or even quadruple wins. As I mentioned before, people have lived sustainably with the river for a very long time, and I hope there might be some lessons we can take from that about perhaps that earlier management of meadows and woodlands in the floodplain to help meet objectives on flooding and drought, on recreating valued habitats, sequestering carbon, and also at the same time as meeting those environmental benefits, we'll also continue to reflect the historic character of the Culm and the landscape that contributes so much to its distinct identity. Now, all of our historic watercourse polygons are based on map sources drawn together at a desk. One of the things that we've yet to provide is a sense of what they look like on the ground, and there's great potential here, I think, for people to get involved. Our interpretation and recording has been necessarily limited. As I say, we've done this pretty quickly and using only mapped sources. So there's lots of scope to add detail, to unpick the individual histories of places, to challenge our conclusions, and to record the what's there, the current condition, and so on. Now, on this slide, I've just included a few things. These are the kinds of things we can't easily include on the in the watercourse polygons. But so this is a bit of a building stone here, poking out the side of the riverbank, exposing the riverbank. That bit of stone is just up here actually, and down here there's some very intriguing posts stuck into the bed of the river, which look really interesting. It could, maybe it's a relatively recent fishing site, but it could be much something much more much older. So we very much hope our layer of data can provide a basis for extending Connecting the Culm citizen science to embrace the catchment's history, and hopefully our layer can act as a bit of an index, a geographical index, to bring information together where people may well know a lot of, might already have a lot of information about these sites, or that we can bring to bear. It might be data that hasn't made it to the archaeological record and so on. And hopefully we can use this, even though it's, as I say, it's desk-based, it's been done very rapidly. Hopefully it will provide a core around which we can develop that as an archaeological source in more detail, and pass that on too. Good, so I think that's my last slide and my last point. I hope you've enjoyed this introduction to the work that we've been doing on the historic character of the Culm. If you're interested in this history or have information to share, please do get in touch through the Connecting the Culm team. And again, that's a picture of me in the River Stour as my hobby. Okay, that's it. Okay, thank you very much.
Fantastic, Antony. Thank you for a wonderful, fascinating audio-visual tour around the Culm and its adjoining land. I'd like to ask everybody, while Antony is looking at the chat, if you could unmute your microphones and just join me in thanking Antony in the usual way. A round of applause for such a fascinating visual and audio tour. So please do unmute yourselves and give him a big round of applause.
Thank you.
Buddy.
That's great, thank you.
So Antony, I think there was one question from Stephen towards the end of the chat, because I know you're currently catching up with it. It was 97% of floodplain meadows lost between 1930 and 1990. Did I hear correctly?
So that's the, yes, that's the figure. That's not our figure. It's one in a published article about floodplain meadows, and it's across Europe, not just not on the Culm. Not even in the UK, it's across Europe. It's a really, it is now a rare habitat type, and there's been major loss to it through intensification of agricultural processes. So where it still survives, it's often protected, but they're certainly interested in trying to expand on that and to recreate floodplain meadows and so on, to try and bring that particular combination of flora and fauna back together where they can. But yes, there's been major loss of it.
Quite scary in some ways.
Yeah.
Also another question, are catch meadows a southwest feature or found nationally under a different name?
So the catch works, I think they do tend to be associated with the southwest, but I think they probably are found more extensively. So we certainly had them on the Stour in Dorset, and I guess, don't know, they would certainly view themselves as in the southwest, I think. But quite how far they extend, I think it's probably one of these things where when you start to look for them, you probably find them in a lot of other places. They're quite a practical way of trying to achieve the same sort of benefits that you get from a bedwork in a floodplain, of kind of catching areas which have got a bit of a slope on them, and we get some hybrid arrangements too, where it's almost like a catchwork blending into a bedwork. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. we've had a couple of comments towards the end of the chat. I don't know if you can see them, about apprentices, and it looks like sort of volunteers looking to get involved. I'm not sure if that's with the project as a whole. So I'd like to ask Wendy, if you're still in the room, would you like to ask Antony or the project team your question? So we have Dominic, Stephen, and a couple of other project people, I think, in the team. I think Nick is here as well, and Dan. So if you want to ask your question, that would be great.
Yes, apologies, I'm a bit dyslexic, so the written chat stuff is really hopeless for me. I use voice activated software normally. I really would like to know what the next plans are in terms of contacting landowners and field walking, because I'm really concerned there's a lot of local, very local things like weirs and so on with cobbles and stuff that are steadily eroding, and they're obviously not going to be captured, Antony, by your polygons, but it's just disappearing. Now, I think earlier in the project, there was some call for putting information on maps, but there are some of us certainly that will have knowledge from childhood, for example, where there may not be public access. So it's not really appropriate to do that until we know that landowners have been contacted and field walking has been done, and then we can add in our local history knowledge. So it's really looking at that next step and, you know, what are we going to do next? Because there's a lot of fantastic stuff there.
Yeah, no, that's great. And in fact, this evening is, in a sense, is a way of us gauging in for the Connecting the Culm team to gauge the sort of level of interest and whether people are keen to get involved in this kind of thing. So there are a few things that are going on in Connecting the Culm which lend themselves to that kind of public engagement and getting people to get involved, and that's one of the things we're keen to do. So as I say, this evening is a good way for us to gauge people's interests and raising problems. So obviously access is always an issue. I mean, we can't have people wandering around the countryside without permission, but where there is public access, or as you say, if you've got memories and you can be quite certain about where something happened, then we can hopefully we can use this mapping as a way of collecting that information together and you know, helping it to be relevant to the future of the Culm as well. But it's going to be great. I mean, there's too much actual chat for me to catch up with while we're speaking. So, but I'm hopefully we're capturing that anyway, and then that'll give us a basis for talking further in the Connecting the Culm team. So they're already doing citizen science, which is looking at water quality and ecological status, that kind of thing. So one of the things we've been talking about is whether we can add a kind of a heritage module to that. And one of the things this evening is, well, is there enough interest for us to go to that length? And it sounds like there is. So that's
yes,
useful.
I've certainly, there was a call to put information on a website, but I didn't feel it was appropriate to put, you know, earlier to put information on at that stage, certainly.
Sure.
Cool. Okay, thanks, Wendy. If I put the hello@Connecting the Culm email address in the chat, would that be helpful? We can keep the dialogue going after the event in that case, if that would be useful. And that doesn't necessarily have to involve emailing going forward. You know, that might involve chatting with some of the other team. So we've got Dan Halford in the room. Dan, I don't know if you want to add anything extra at this point, if you're there and able to unmute. If not, we can liaise with Wendy after the event.
Hello, yeah, yeah. Well, if you want to get in touch with me for if you own any land or know of people who may be interested if you own land, the best way is probably to get in touch with hello@Connecting the Culm, and yeah, I'll happily follow it up.
Brilliant, thanks, Dan. And I think Ted and Tracy, I think you were looking for an opportunity to get involved as well. And I think you put thumbs up when heritage module was mentioned. So I think we've got that one logged, but if you want to
We're already doing the citizen science part, and it would be really interesting. We're down by the Abbey, and so where we've been collecting water is under one of the old bridges. So just to take some photographs of things that we've seen, sort of features, maybe if those could be added to the map in some way, or if we can get involved in some way, that would be great. We'd be really interested in that.
Grant, absolutely.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, I think we're all keen to join everything up as much as possible, definitely.
I think something that we can do after this event is when we send around the recording, we'll also send around a link to a Google form that we've got online, and you can enter your interests in getting involved in a working group on that Google form. And if there's plenty of people who want to get involved in practical action on the ground, like field surveys on the heritage side, that will be a really good place to capture that interest. So we'll share that link with you after the event.
Fantastic. Okay, any more direct questions for Antony before we draw this evening's event to a close?
There was one there I saw about the catchworks and bedworks, and did they link to the meadows, the Drow Meadows, Wiltshire, Dorset and Hampshire? Yeah, yes, there's similar same kind of thing really. They're the water meadows, catch meadows, bedworks. We tend to just use the term bedwork and catchwork because it helps distinguish them from other watery forms of meadow, like the funnel-shaped ones I was showing too. So the bedworks and catchworks are the ones which are constructed, but in exactly the same kinds of things that you get actually very close to where we live. We have pretty big extant bedworks which are kind of standing by, a metre or so. But the ones that we've seen on the Culm are not as prominent as that now. But we can still see the indications of them. Oh, there's a question there about the GIS. Yes, it was QGIS, QGIS, which is a kind of a free package. Can be a bit fun to get your head around, but it's a very powerful piece of software. Yeah.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Thanks.
Antony, I just was wondering, just picking up on there seems to be quite a lot of interest in the citizen science opportunities and the opportunities to kind of get out and about in the field and help feedback on some of your data. I just wanted to check if you have any thoughts on either geographically or in terms of the types of features. Are there particular areas that you would think would be most valuable to focus on?
Yeah, so what I'm wondering about is whether, and it's not something we're going to be able to resolve this evening, but I think probably the best thing would be to have a chat with the team about how we make our information available. And then if people go out wherever they want to go, if they're in the vicinity of one of the things that we've flagged, they take some photographs and send that to Connecting the Culm and tell us the number of the feature, the HWP number, its identifier, and where they took the photograph. Then that would we could do it that way. So rather than saying there are particular places we want to go, it'd be just really to work around where people tend to be going anyway, and whether they want to do it on their normal walk around the place or whether they want to make a specific trip out to somewhere. We could do it like that. But I think just anything really to help capture some more information about these places and help us refine what we know and produce sort of more evidence would be great. In a sense, I don't think we can go wrong.
If there are no more questions, then I think if you'd like to join me again in thanking Antony in the usual way, and we'll draw the event to a close. It's been really good to have you all in the room, and I hope you've really enjoyed Antony's talk and the discussion that we've had.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been great to speak to you all. That's great.
Thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Antony.
Thank you.